Okay, so yesterday we talked about the invasion of Sicily and how the Germans and Italians escaped to the toe of Italy. And I put this slide together a few years ago just to kind of, I said this was the largest amphibious invasion in history, and I thought I'd just show you kind of how they pulled it off. This is these blue ships here are Royal Navy, and then the U.S. in this kind of yellowish color here. Convoys, landing ships, and so forth, naval forces. Okay, as you can see, this is where we're going to land. Then we're going to make it up here. This is a large landing craft. Some of the smaller landing craft that you see in some of the videos I show are actually referred to as Higgins boats, and I'll get into that when we get to D-Day. But this map up here kind of shows the tide turning in the war, because in this red box you see are evacuations. These are British evacuations. Some of you will remember, of course, Dunkirk in May, June of 40, west coast of France, British Somaliland, Greece, Crete, Singapore, Southeast Asia, February, March of 42. The last date on here is 42. Then we move over to the blue here, and these are landings and invasions. So you kind of see that tide beginning to switch. May, November, that's Torch. That's when we land in North Africa. Operation Husky is Sicily. Avalanche, Salerno. That's when we're going into Italy. Okay, and this is in September of 43. Shingle is Anzio, Italy, and then D-Day, June of 44 in France, that everybody's familiar with, and then some down here in Southeast Asia. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting map and slide I put together for your viewing pleasure. All right, so Italy. All right, now the Italians have dropped out. Okay, and you can see the invasions here. This is the British 8th Army, the same ones that were fighting Rommel under Montgomery in North Africa will land on the toe. The Americans and British will land here at Salerno. All right, and then later at Anzio, which is a little bit further up the coast. This map shows you the topography here, and we talked about the 23 divisions that the Germans are going to place in Italy. And because they control the high ground in these mountainous areas and regions of Italy, and this is Naples. We watched a little bit of video there at the end of the hour yesterday, and we actually saw Richard Tregaskis, the embedded journalist with the military there, was wounded in the head, took shrapnel in the head. Okay, you saw that at the end of the hour yesterday. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and so that's here at Naples. Okay, Anzio's further up the coast right here, where we will land a little bit later on. And these are some of the lines, kind of lines of defenses that the Germans had that we're going to have to wade through under heavy fighting. Some very brutal combat here. And I told you I want to share a couple of stories here. One is about one of Kansas' own, and that's Bob Dole. Bob Dole, who served in the United States Senate for a couple of decades from Kansas. He's from Russell, Kansas. Okay, and Bob Dole went into the military after Pearl Harbor, and he was sent to Italy. And while fighting in Italy, similarly to what happened to Richard Tregaskis and a whole bunch of other guys, they were hit by shrapnel from a German artillery shell. And Bob Dole was hit pretty bad. Basically, the whole right side of his body was hit, okay? And it really tore up his right arm and his side. He spent 6 months in the hospital, okay? While he was in the hospital, interestingly, he met another guy that had been wounded not by shrapnel but had been shot several times. And I'm going to tell you his story later. But his name is, he's a Japanese American named Daniel Inoue. So these two veterans, or these two soldiers, are going to meet in the military hospital in Italy. And don't let me forget to tell you about military hospitals in Italy, okay? But Bob Dole's in there, and he tells Daniel Inouye, he says, when I get home from this war, I'm going to run for Congress, okay? And Bob Dole did. He ran for president in 1996 against Bill Clinton, and obviously lost. But Bob Dole is a politician for many years. What politicians do when they go out and campaign is they shake hands, they meet people, they kiss babies, and this sort of thing. But Bob Dole, for the rest of his life, lost the use of his right hand. Okay, and so as a politician, we shake hands with right hand, right? Well, Bob Dole always carried a pen in his right hand so that people wouldn't reach out to shake his hand. So as he was campaigning, he would say, "Hi, I'm Bob Dole. Nice to meet you. How are you? Good to meet you." Okay, and so he always has something in his right hand. All right, for the rest of his life, he's still alive, but he's not doing very well. Okay, I mean, because age, you know, but he's somebody that we can be proud of from the state of Kansas. Now, the other guy that I want to talk about is Daniel Inouye. Now, there was in your homework, if you've started on this yet, okay, there's a question about Japanese Americans, okay, and how we treated them during the war. And I think everybody's probably familiar with this, right? That the Japanese internment, okay? I think somebody read a book about it in here or the other class, okay, that I was grading the other night, okay? These Japanese Americans that most, you know, the ones that lived on the West Coast, when Pearl Harbor happened, there was a real fear that the Japanese might invade the United States on the West Coast. And so President Roosevelt, and the governor of California at the time, was a guy named Earl Warren. Earl Warren would later go on to become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court from 1954 to 1969. And is one of the most important Supreme Court justices of the 20th century, Earl Warren. Okay? They made this decision to have the Japanese Americans, many of them U.S. citizens, placed into camps in places like Arizona at like horse racing tracks and so forth. They would build these barracks or housing for them, and they would be behind barbed wire, and there would be armed guards. They weren't labor camps or anything like that, but they were internment to hold them. Shockingly, guys, they asked some of the people that were living in these camps if they wanted to go fight on our behalf, okay? Which, takes a little bit of gall to ask as you've had somebody interned like this. A lot of these people lost their homes. A lot of them lost their businesses. They lost all their belongings because they couldn't take all that stuff with them to the camps, okay? I don't know if you guys know this or not. We did intern some German and Italian Americans as well. The British did this, especially with Germans and living in Britain. They put them they put them in captivity because of this fear of people being spies. Okay, and the American people wondered whether these Japanese Americans would be more loyal to the Emperor of Japan than to the United States. Okay, and so now historians generally and people generally say that this was unwarranted and we should not have done this, okay, to the Japanese Americans, especially the U.S. citizens. And then there are a few that say that it was justifiable under the circumstances. Okay, now you're going to find very few people that say that. But like anything else, there are two sides to every story, okay? And I'm not here to defend the executive order that did this. I will tell you this, that Chief Justice Earl Warren asked later in life, as the governor of California at the time, asked if he would do it over again, if given the choice. And he said yes, he would do it over again, okay? there was a real fear that the Japanese may invade on the West Coast. And now, whether these people would be spies or loyal or what have you, that's very questionable. We do know that Pearl Harbor had spies there because they knew where our ships were. They had photographs of where our ships were docked that were used as reconnaissance for Pearl Harbor when they attacked us. So it's not like there aren't spies, okay? There are spies in the United States today. There are many Chinese spies in this country right now as we speak, trying to steal our technology, okay? They have tens of thousands of Chinese students in our universities, okay? And universities often do research. They do, you get degrees in engineering and so forth, and if the Chinese can get people to get into jobs working at places where we do highly sensitive work, military work, like at a McDonnell Douglas or something like that builds our aircraft. If you look at the Chinese stealth fighter, which is relatively new, gosh, it looks very similar. You know how they talk about the Russians hacking into email systems and servers and so forth. You don't think the Chinese do that? They're doing that all the time. We are under attack all the time, okay, by spies. All right? Some of the spies in this country are our allies. The Jews, the Israelis, they have a lot of spies in the United States because they need to know how we're going to react in different situations. Is the United States going to back us, or are they not going to back us in a certain situation? So they have people in place to try and find out exactly where American policymakers stand on these issues. Sam?
I mean, so do we have lots of spies everywhere else too?
Well, we don't publicize it, but we do have spies. We have spies in Russia. We have spies in China. We have spies probably in Iran. Trying to do we try and subvert Iran's nuclear program through hacking? Absolutely. Okay. There was it's probably about 3 years ago. In Iran's nuclear facilities were hit by a virus, their computer systems. Now it was either us or the Israelis. Somebody did it. Okay. And I heard they left an American flag on there. The hackers, whoever did it, okay? So, I don't know, okay? But yeah, so, but as I was saying, they asked these Japanese, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask how many people are in a division.
Let's see, go, I have some notes on this for War and Peace. I would say between 10 and 20,000. Different countries use different, and different branches have different numbers as well. But I can double check that. Okay, so they asked these Japanese American men, young men, will you go fight on the behalf of America? And yes, many volunteered. And they built an entire regiment of Japanese Americans called the 442nd Regiment. Okay? Now, they didn't send these guys to the Pacific for obvious reasons, but they did go to Italy. The 442nd Regiment became the most decorated regiment of the entire war. How do you earn decorations in warfare? Sometimes by dying. Saving other people, acts of valor, okay, acts of uncommon valor, going above and beyond the call of duty. That's how you get medals, okay. These guys earned a lot of medals, and none more than one of their captains, Daniel Inouye, okay. This is Daniel Inouye as a soldier. And when he met Bob Dole in the hospital, and Bob Dole said, I'm going to run for Congress when I get back from the war. Well, Daniel Inouye did the same thing and ran for Congress from Hawaii and was elected and served in the Senate. And before he passed away just a few years ago, Daniel Inouye was the Senate President pro tempore. fourth in line to be president of the United States. Okay? His story is almost too much to believe. But I'm going to read this to you, okay? Unbelievable what this guy did, okay? April 21st, 1945, so this is a little bit later, and they're way up in the north of Italy, okay? Was grievously wounded while leading an assault on a heavily defended ridge near San Teresa in Tuscany, Italy, called the Col Mustello. The ridge served as a strong point of the German fortifications known as the Gothic Line, the last and most unyielding line of German defenses works in Italy. As he led his platoon in a flanking maneuver, 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away. Pinning his men to the ground, Inoue stood up to attack and was shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wounds, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun position, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. As his squad distracted the third machine gun, Inoue crawled towards the final bunker. Coming within 10 yards, he raised himself up and cocked his arm to throw his last grenade. A German soldier inside the bunker fired a rifle grenade, which struck his right elbow, nearly severing the arm, leaving his primed grenade reflexively clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. His arm was dangling. Inoue's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to keep back out of fear. His severed fist would involuntarily relax and drop the grenade. While the German inside the bunker reloaded his rifle, Inoue pried the live grenade from his useless right hand, transferred it to his left. As the enemy soldier aimed his rifle at him, Inoue tossed the grenade into the bunker and destroyed it. He stumbled to his feet and continued forward, silencing the last German resistance with a one-handed, left-handed burst from his Thompson machine gun before being wounded in the leg and tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was to order them back to their positions, saying, "Nobody called off the war." Daniel Inouye, okay, served in the Senate for a couple of decades, in Congress for a couple of decades. Okay, pretty cool story, and it's really, I think, cool that Dole and Inouye met in the military hospital in Italy. Okay, now back to the military hospital. General Patton, who's leading the U.S. First Army, was visiting one of these military hospitals. Not necessarily the same one Dole and Inouye were in. And this was kind of a somber event because these guys there's a row of bodies on each side. And a lot of them are really bandaged up. You saw some of the wounds from Italy yesterday in the video. And he's pinning Purple Hearts on these guys because if you get wounded in battle, you receive a Purple Heart. And the media's there, the doctors, the nurses are there, and he's whispering in their ears, kind of leaning down, talking to them. Some of these guys are going to live, some of them won't. And he gets to the end of this medical ward, and there's this soldier sitting on the end of the bed in uniform. And he's kind of got his head in his hands, kind of whimpering. And Patton gets there, and he's like, looks at this kid, he goes, "What's wrong with you? I mean, the kid's not wounded. Why are you in a hospital? Why are you here? What are you doing?" And the kid's kind of sobbing, and he's like, "I just can't take it anymore." He's probably get shell shocked. He's got post-traumatic stress. Okay? Well, we didn't really talk about post-traumatic stress in World War II. And Patton certainly didn't believe in such a thing. He said he felt either you were a man and you could handle it or you couldn't. And so Patton starts berating this young man, yelling at him, screaming at him. He's got his leather gloves in his hand, okay? And he just whacks this kid upside the head with his leather gloves. And the doctors, the nurses, the journalists are all there and like, you know, they can't believe what Patton's doing to this young man. And he says, you're going back to the front. Get out of here, you know. And so word starts to leak out about this, okay? And the media is there. Now, the media is controlled, okay, by the government. So this isn't going to, you know, get out unless the government wants it to. And but word does get back to Eisenhower and this soldier's mother. And so Eisenhower kind of has a PR nightmare here on his hands. So he doesn't want to fire Patton because Patton is very valuable. But he is going to take away his army. Okay, Patton will be stripped of command for these actions in a hospital in Italy. Okay, now that's going to be important a little bit later on. All right, because Patton doesn't have a job at this point in time. And Patton's been doing other things too. Okay, like disobeying orders from Monty because he doesn't like Monty. Okay, and he's always complaining to Eisenhower. And Eisenhower's like, all right, I gotta show this guy who's in charge. Okay, and he does. Okay, but the 442nd Regiment is a great story of young men that are not only fighting for the country they love, the United States, but they're fighting to show the American people that they love the United States and they're willing to sacrifice for it. And it's a wonderful story. I mean, it's great heroism and tragedy as well that involved the whole situation with the Japanese Americans. And everybody can have a different viewpoint on that, but I don't think you can have a different viewpoint on the heroicism of these young men. Okay, so we're going to work our way. Now, the Gothic line that we talked about, it's further up here in Italy, up in here, okay? And that's not till 1945. All right, so now we're going to change directions for a little while, okay? And I think this merits discussion or, you know, teaching because it is the largest air war in the history of the world. I don't know if we will ever have an air war like we had in World War II. I don't think it's possible. This is incredibly large. The number of planes, the number of pilots, the number of crew that are necessary for this, okay? Now, the Allies have going for them a combined effort between the Royal Air Force, the RAF, and the United States Army Air Corps. Now, we don't have a separate branch of Air Force at this point until after World War II. So they referred to as Army Air Force or Army Air Corps. And they have the 8th Army Air Corps, the 12th Army Air Corps, and so forth, okay? The RAF, you know, they were in this thing before we were. So they had begun bombing Germany as early as 1941. Obviously, we don't get over there until later, okay? Now, when we did the combined air war, what generally happened was the RAF bombed at night, okay? And the Americans bombed during the daylight hours. So it was, you know, day and night, day and night, day and night, okay? Unrelenting pressure on Germany, okay? So this is a photograph of a British Lancaster, all right? It is that plane on that wall in the middle top. Okay, see the bullseye on the side of it? That's a British marking. Okay, it's a large bomber. Okay. Now, this is one plane making one bombing run, or one what you would refer to as a sortie. Okay, when you make a bombing run, or you go out for a sortie. All right. So the picture on the left is the first bomb release from this one plane. they are going to drop here 1,170 4-pound stick incendiaries. Okay? Now, this grenade, which is a pineapple grenade, World War II. I don't know how many guys have stopped by my desk and picked this up over the year. Here. It's not live, it's been gutted. Okay, you can take the top off. I use it to hold my rubber bands. Okay. So that's what? It's what? 3 or 4 pounds? 3 or 4 pounds? Okay. Now when that blows up, that heavy metal in that is going to become shrapnel. Okay, and that's what's going to kill people. All right. These 4-pound stick incendiaries, about the same weight. You've all held like a 3 or 5 pound, done some jazzercise stuff, right? These are going to start fires. Incendiaries start fires. Now, in Europe, old Europe, with wooden structures, okay, it's very effective bombing. And when you're bombing at night, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where your bomb's going to land. So if you're trying to take out a factory at night, this could be very difficult. So you would saturate an area with bombs, or what some people refer to as carpet bombing or saturation bombing. You following me? Okay. Then, in the second picture here, this is the second release, 108 30-pound J incendiaries. So any of you guys that have been in a weight room, I usually curl with, 35s, 40s, but 30s are pretty, I'm kidding. I'm lucky if I can do 30s, okay? Usually I'm a 25 guy, but you guys know what a 30-pound weight feels like, okay? There's 108 of those, these right here, okay? And those are going to cause explosions and fires as well. And then for good measure, to scare the crap out of the Germans, a 4,000-pound cookie bomb. And this will leave a large crater. Okay? Now, this is a pretty typical mission. Now, this isn't the only bomber going out. Generally, guys, there are hundreds of these bombers going out on a bombing run. The amount of devastation caused by this air war is almost too much to fathom. Okay, as I'm about to show you here in a second. Are you ready?
Oh, it's a video.
What?
It's that video.
What's this?
Do we have a video?
Looks kind of like.
Oh, it's coming.
There's a video, guys.
Oh, there's video. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if this will pick up on the camera, but you probably can't hardly see it from there. Okay, this is what many European cities wound up looking like after these bombing raids. Okay, I believe this is Hamburg, Germany. All right. Now, this is U.S. in blue, Royal Air Force in red. Now, some of these numbers are pretty staggering. Okay, tons of bombs dropped during World War II by the United States. 1.46 million tons. So multiply 2,000 times 1.4 million pounds of bombs. The British, 1.3 million tons. Bomber sorties. Now this is how many times these British Lancasters, B-17s, B-25s, B-24s went out on bombing runs. For the United States, 754,000 bomber sorties. The British, 687,000. It's almost 1.4 million times bombers went out over Germany. Fighter sorties for the Americans, 991,000. The British were at this longer, 1.6 million. Claimed enemy aircraft destroyed by these air forces. The Americans claimed 35,700 enemy aircraft destroyed. The British 21,600. Now, of all the numbers on this chart, this is the least likely to be accurate. When our fighters go out and kill other planes and knock them down and that sort of thing, Fighter pilots are a lot like fishermen. You should have seen the size of that fish I caught. Okay? They tend to exaggerate. So these numbers are questionable. Now this is where it starts to hit you in the gut a little bit. Bomber planes lost. Americans lost 9,949 bomber planes. Now those of you that read Unbroken, when they talked about the B-24 that they were flying, if you remember how they described it, they said it's like trying to fly a tank. A lot of these planes, these are World War II planes, okay, this is 1940s. A lot of these planes had malfunctions, okay? But a lot of them were shot down as well. But remember, on a B-17, there's a 10-man crew. So you lose one of these bombers, there's a good chance you just lost 10 men. Okay? So the British had almost 12,000 bombers lost. I mean, just last week, or earlier this week, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen in training, practice training, our military. I think we've lost about 10 guys in the last 2 weeks just in training. Fighter planes lost, the Americans 8,400, the British 10,000. Now, personnel lost in action total 79,265 for the Americans, 79,281 for the British. That's a lot of people. It's almost 80,000 people will perish in the air war. Pilots, crew members. Okay. Bomber planes assigned to combat units. So this is a snapshot. So like 1 month during the war, this is how many planes we had in action that were going, that were fighting. Bomber planes assigned to combat units. In March of 1945, the United States had 7,177 bombers in action. The British in April 45, 6,900. So in order to do that, you've got all these fighter planes too, 6,200 in May 45, August 44, the British 7,700. In order to pull off this air war, personnel assigned to these units, 619,000 people to run this air war for the Americans and 700,000 for the British. This is a massive effort. This is a massive air war. Okay? So, like I was saying before, the United States, and this is a B-17 here, and I've introduced this to you before, right? The B-17. And this is a daylight bombing grade. Oh, what's that? Is that a video? Okay, so we'll get these notes down and we'll watch this video, okay? Now, the U.S. 8th Army Air Force began bombing in August of 42. So similarly, started fighting in North Africa in November of 42. This starts a little earlier. We had started putting these planes in production in 1935. Now, early on, in 42 and early 43, we were losing a lot of these planes. Okay, and what we found out, because you can tell what year a B-17 was made by the nose cone. Because early on, these planes were susceptible to attack by German fighter planes from the front. They would attack from the front. We didn't have defenses on the front of the plane. So if you look at a B-17 and you see a machine gun on the front, you know it was made after midway through 1943. Better protect itself. Okay. So they would take out pinpoint bombing. I talked about the Norden bomb site. Did I talk about that? This again is why smart people are important. Let's say you're flying at say 10,000 feet in a Cessna, okay, and you're flying over a Walmart at 10,000 feet, and you have a bowling ball, and you want to drop this bowling ball out of your Cessna and hit the Walmart at 10,000 feet. How successful are you going to be?
Depends on how much math you need.
Yeah. there's a lot of factors. Okay? Wind speed, airspeed, altitude, Earth's rotation. Okay? The Norden bomb sight was created by a guy named Norden, who was really smart. This machine would actually take over flying the plane once they got over the area they wanted to bomb. Okay? And it would factor in when to release the bombs. So even though these are dumb weapons, okay, World War II we used dumb weapons. We have smart weapons today. We can launch a cruise missile from 1,500 miles away and hit within 3 feet of what we want to hit. These are dumb weapons, and they kill indiscriminately. Okay, so that's what you're going to see in this video. But so the Norden bomb sight was very successful. So we could do more pinpoint. It's not exactly pinpoint, right? Okay. Germans could see the B-17s. So as our planes are flying over Germany, guess what? They're shooting at our planes. Flat. That grenade I passed around, like grenades blowing up in the air. Hit the engine, hit the pilot. Take down the plane. Okay? So later on, we developed fighter planes that could go along with our bombers and protect them. See, fighter planes don't have the fuel capacity as bombers. So they built these extra tanks that they could put on the wings that they would get the fighter planes to where the bombers were. And then they would use the regular fuel tanks to get home. Okay? And more fuel capacity on these fighter planes as well. So these long-range fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, okay, were developed. And boy, they really helped these bombers. Okay, so later in the war, we're going to lose fewer bombers than we did early in the war for sure. Okay, where are they going to hit? Well, obviously they want to take out the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, but they're going to go after their factories. The Germans knew that we would, and they tried to hide them, disperse them, and so forth. We're going to hit infrastructure, railroads, highways, try and paralyze Germany. Really, guys, what we're trying to do is what Germany tried to do to Britain, is get them to surrender before we have to send millions of men into battle, losing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men. If we can bomb them into submission, they'll quit, and we won't have to send in all the men. It didn't work. Okay? Just a couple little pictures here. There's bombing of this, like a railroad area. And then you can see, guys, hundreds of bombers at a time. Am I almost out of time?
Yeah.
Really? 2 minutes? Okay, so tomorrow, Friday, we will begin with, we'll be on an airplane with the B-17 crew over Germany. Okay, and you'll get to see exactly what it was like. Yes? Sorry? Who? Like everybody's going to be gone?
I'm going to keep the air slide of the people.
Like, follow, and subscribe.